Violence ravages Syria again. More than 1,000 people killed in 2 days. It is one of the deadliest clashes since the country's civil war erupted 14 years ago. The fighting, a brutal mix of anti-government uprisings, security force crackdowns and revenge killings, pushes Syria deeper into chaos. Look at this video from Latakia, a port city in Syria. More than a dozen unidentified bodies of civilians lie on the roadside. Reuters was not able to independently verify the date of the video or the identity of the bodies. There are 13 bodies seen in the video, and the dead appear to be wearing civilian clothes. It is likely the worst communal violence since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. In December 2024, long-time Syrian leader and a member of the country's Alawite minority, Bashar al-Assad, was unseated by rebel groups. His fall was seen as a turning point for the country, raising hopes for a more stable Syria. But 3 months later, are those hopes fading? Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has been grappling with the fallout of mass killings of members of the Alawite minority in western Syria. Sharaa said the recent violence threatens his efforts to unite Syria after 14 years of conflict. The government of Syria says it has ended an operation in the violence-hit coastal cities of Latakia and Tartus after 4 days of fighting between security forces and pro-Assad armed fighters. The clashes put the focus back on Syria's vulnerability. We break down the new fault lines, decode the power struggles, what lies ahead. And can Syria's new government maintain peace in a country still suffering the effects of more than a decade of civil unrest? It was the deadliest wave of violence Syria has seen since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December last year. More than 1,000 people were killed in just 72 hours in clashes between security forces and loyalists of the ousted regime. The once powerful Alawite community bore the brunt of the bloodshed. On the 6th of March, gunfire and chaos broke out in Syria's coastal regions of Tartus and Latakia. Pro-Assad gunmen ambushed security forces. In retaliation, government troops joined forces with Sunni armed fighters to crack down on the insurgents. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that among the dead, 830 were civilians. Many are said to have been shot at close range. More than 125 government security personnel and 148 pro-Assad militants also lost their lives. To understand what exactly is happening in Syria, one must understand its demographics. Tensions between the country's Sunni majority and the Alawite minority had been escalating since Assad's downfall. The Alawites, once dominant under the Assad regime, faced retribution. The new government, led by interim president Ahmed al-Sharaa, had vowed to create an inclusive political system, but many remained skeptical.
So what basically happened is that former regimes had tried to launch an uprising and a counter-revolution basically in a localized area in the Syrian coast, where the Alawite minority is the predominant demographic group. And in the initial phase, many Syrian security officers and civilians were killed by the regime remnants. And in response, the Syrian army launched a counteroffensive and sent huge military reinforcements to Syria's coast and basically crushed the uprising. However, as there are tensions between the Alawite community and the non-Alawite community in Syria, we have seen some violations being committed by the Syrian government forces. And this was actually not a surprise because the social tensions are quite high, and many Syrians think that the Alawite community is responsible for the crimes of the Assad regime.
Tensions escalated after armed Assad loyalists ambushed Syrian security around Latakia and Jablet, killing 13 personnel. Pro-Assad Alawite gunmen overwhelmed government security forces and later took control of Kardaha, Assad's hometown, as Damascus scrambled to bring in reinforcements. In the government crackdown that followed, hundreds of civilians were killed, mostly Alawites. But who are the Alawites? The Alawites are a small sect making up just 10% of Syria's population. An offshoot of Shia Islam, they were historically marginalized until Hafez al-Assad, an Alawite, seized power in 1970. Under his rule, Alawites controlled key military and security positions. Hafez remained president for 30 years, until his death in 2000. After Hafez's death, his son Bashar al-Assad inherited the presidency. But the power structure they built crumbled after the fall of Assad.
So the Alawites are a small sect, a minority religious group, which is predominantly located in Syria's coast. Bashar al-Assad was of Alawite descent as well, and he basically used and exploited the Alawite community for its state and for its crimes and to suppress the Syrian society. With the collapse of the Assad regime, the Alawites face two main difficulties. One is that many in Syria perceive them quite difficultly, and they have a real anger against and hatred against the Alawites. This is a reality, unfortunate reality of Syria.
3 months ago, the dominant group in the rebel alliance, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, overthrew Assad. Since then, they have asserted control over Syria's Mediterranean coast, once a stronghold of the Assads. HTS leader Ahmad al-Shara became the new government's interim president, but 3 months later, Shara faces big challenges maintaining peace in the country. The interim president said the recent mass killings of members of ousted President Bashar al-Assad's minority sect were a threat to his mission to unite the country, and promised to punish those responsible, including his own allies, if necessary.
Syria is, as we have confirmed, a state of law. The law will take its course on all, and we originally fought the regime and reached Damascus to defend the oppressed people, and we won't accept that any blood be shed unjustly, or goes without punishment or accountability. Whoever he is, even if he were among those closest to us or the most distant from us, there is no difference in this matter. Violating people's sanctity, violating their religion, violating their money, this is a red line in Syria. This is not only a constitutional law, but it is also a moral law.
There were reports of mass executions and systematic killings. Electricity and water were cut off in large areas of Latakia, pushing civilians further into crisis. Videos show the intensity of the violence, bodies left on the streets, unburied, unclaimed. Civilians, including women and children, are among the victims. After days of clashes, Syria's government has announced the end of the military operation against pro-Assad insurgents. The government also said that security forces will continue searching for sleeper cells and remnants of the insurgency of former government loyalists. Life gradually returned to Latakia's streets on Monday, the 10th of March, just days after Syria suffered one of its worst bloodsheds. People watched in lengthy queues outside bakeries to get their bread. Many complained of shortages.
There is no bread, no water, no electricity. There is nothing currently.
We are 13 people at home. They gave us 2 bundles of bread. If we make a sandwich for each child, they would only take 1 sandwich per day. What is this life? Look at all these people. I swear it is painful.
Security forces continue to patrol the streets.
2 days before the clashes, the situation was good and Ramzan was beautiful. People could go out to work. But now look at the street. It is empty and people do not go out.
On Monday, the Syrian presidency announced an agreement with the head of the Kurdish-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, to integrate the institutions of the autonomous Kurdish administration in the northeast into the national government. Hundreds of Syrian Kurds came out onto the streets of Qamishli to celebrate the announcement of a deal in Damascus. Celebrating people chanted unity slogans, raising Syrian PKK and SDF flags. The SDF commander Mazloum Abdi said that they were working together with the Syrian administration to guarantee a transitional phase that reflects the aspirations of the Syrian people for justice and stability. What is the SDF? What is the history of Syria? And who controls what in the country now? Syria is home to one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. From its ancient roots to the Syrian civil war and the recent political instability, the country has had a complex and chaotic history. Modern Syria gained its independence from France in 1946. Between 1949 and 1971, the country had waves of political instability, with multiple military coups and coup attempts. Between 1958 and 1961, Syria briefly joined with Egypt to form the United Arab Republic. In 1963, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, which was active throughout West Asia since the late 1940s, seized power of Syria in a coup known as the Ba'ath Revolution. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel seized the Golan Heights, a rocky plateau located in southwestern Syria. Conflict over this coveted area continued for years. It goes on to this day. In 1970, Hafez al-Assad, the Syrian Minister of Defense, overthrew the de facto leader of Syria, Salah Jadid. Hafez al-Assad was an Alawite, a minority group in the country. During his presidency, Hafez was credited with strengthening the Syrian military with the help of the Soviets. Hafez ruled Syria for 30 years and died in 2000. Bashar al-Assad inherited the presidency after the passing of Hafez in 2000. At the start of his presidency, Bashar al-Assad released 600 political prisoners. Syrians grew hopeful that their new leader would grant more freedom and impose less oppression than his father. However, within a year, Bashar used threats and arrests to stop pro-reform activism. In 2002, the United States accused Syria of acquiring weapons of mass destruction and listed the nation as a member of the so-called Axis of Evil countries. After a few years of diplomacy between Assad and other nations, the United States renewed sanctions against Syria in 2010, saying the regime supported terrorist groups. Revolts in Egypt and Tunisia, which became known as the Arab Spring, broke out in early 2011. At the height of the Arab Spring, pro-democracy demonstrators took to the streets in Syria as well. When the Syrian government used deadly force to crush the dissent, protests demanding President Bashar al-Assad's resignation erupted nationwide. Syria descended into a multidimensional civil war with the involvement of different countries. In 2024, Assad was finally ousted after his regime collapsed during a major offensive by opposition forces. For more than half a century after Assad's family reigned supreme over Syria. Let's take a look at the territorial control of various groups in Syria. The most powerful faction, which now controls most of Syria, is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Led by Ahmed al-Sharaa, who is also Syria's interim president, the group has its origins in the al-Nusra Front. Initially aligned with terrorist groups Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Sharaa's focus on local Syrian governance over global jihad led him to split from both groups by 2017 and merge with several other Islamist factions to form HTS. The group has since rebranded as a more moderate and pragmatic organization that has promised to protect minority rights. The Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, is the military force of the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, which controls the eastern region. Led by the Kurdish People's Protection Unit. It also includes Arab militias as well as minorities such as Assyrians and Armenians. While the group's secular democratic ideology and equal treatment of women has garnered international support, they have been accused by other rebel groups of collaborating with the Assad regime and are considered by Turkey to be a branch of the separatist Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, who are designated as a terrorist group by multiple governments. Still holding territory in the northwest is the Syrian National Army, or SNA. Having grown out of the loose coalition of rebel groups known as the Free Syrian Army early in the civil war. The SNA represents both Islamic and secular factions that are directly backed by Turkey and support the so-called Syrian interim government based in the town of Assaz. While they have at times been both an ally and a rival to HTS, the SNA has consistently fought against the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Historically rich, Syria's cities Damascus and Aleppo are among the oldest in the world. The country also has valuable resources, including oil, gas, and fertile farmland. But Syria's significance goes beyond its resources. Its real power lies in its location. Let's understand Syria's geopolitical importance. Strategically located, Syria is placed at crossroads between Asia, Europe, and Africa. a significant factor influencing regional stability and global power dynamics. Syria also acts as a buffer state. A buffer state is a neutral country between two hostile countries that tries to prevent the outbreak of regional conflict. It has served as a buffer between rival powers, especially the US, Turkey, Iran and Russia. Syria is economically important as well. Syria has significant oil and natural gas reserves, particularly in Deir ez-Zor. Syria's location makes it important for regional trade, including potential pipeline routes for oil and gas. Therefore, global powers like Russia, the US, Iran and Turkey have always seen Syria as a gateway to controlling trade routes, energy pipelines and regional politics. The Syrian government under Assad had troops that controlled a large part of the country, strengthened by the Allied forces dispatched by Russia and Iran. Russia, that had military bases in Syria before the civil war, launched an air campaign in support of Assad in 2015. It was crucial to turn the tide of the civil war in Assad's regime's favor. After he was ousted in December 2024, Assad fled to Russia and has taken political asylum there. Moscow's stance shifted following the December 8 ouster of Assad. The Syrian embassy in Moscow opened under a new flag, and Russian state media began referring to the rebels as armed opposition rather than a terrorist group. Many Syrians still want to see Russian forces leave, but their interim government says it is open to further cooperation. After the recent clashes, Russia has said it wants to see a united and friendly Syria, because instability there could affect the whole Middle East. The Iran-Syria alliance dates back to the first years after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Syria was the only Arab country that openly stood by Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. On the other hand, Tehran provided Damascus significant support for the Syrian Ba'athist government in the Syrian civil war. Iran's position in the future Syria remains uncertain. Shortly before the HTS-led coalition overthrew Assad, al-Shara had urged Iran to abandon its support for Syria's former government and establish relations with HTS. Although Iran wants to maintain relations with Syria after the fall of Assad, it stated that HTS's approach towards Israel would be crucial. The recent Syrian clashes started about a week after Turkey Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, whose country is a major backer of Shara's rule, warned Iran against moving to challenge the new Syrian government by empowering groups opposed to it. But Iran has condemned the recent violence in Syria. Amid the ongoing tensions in West Asia, Israel is expanding its presence in Syria. Israel Defense Force said that it is setting up new posts in Syria to prevent new regime military buildup along the 65-kilometer Israeli border. The IDF is also building more outposts for what it calls countering the new regime from deploying long-range weapons south of Damascus. The Israeli Air Force has carried out daily strikes targeting Syrian posts, aiming to disrupt the new administration's military capabilities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in February that southern Syria must be completely demilitarized, warning that his government would not accept the presence of the forces of the new Islamist-led government near its territory. Syria stands at a crossroads again. Uniting Syria is perhaps the biggest challenge for al-Shara, unless issues such as inclusivity, political participation and unequal living conditions throughout the country are not addressed by the new regime. Syria will continue to witness the sectarian strife.